Ethan Monroe hadn't expected last night to be anything extraordinary. The city hummed softly outside his apartment window, neon reflections glinting on rain-soaked streets, and the familiar rhythm of cars and distant sirens provided an oddly soothing backdrop. He had finished editing a promotional video for a client and settled on the couch with a cup of chamomile tea, ready to unwind. Yet, as he shifted into the cushions, a sharp, insistent pain struck his lower abdomen. He froze, clutching his stomach, breath shallow, and tried to convince himself it was nothing, a passing cramp, perhaps something he had eaten. The ache, however, didn't subside. It twisted and pulsed with an intensity that made it impossible to ignore. Ethan winced, pressing his palms firmly against his midsection, feeling a wave of unease rise with every heartbeat. Normally, he would shrug off minor ailments, relying on his resilience to carry him through the discomfort, but tonight was different. The pain seemed purposeful, almost insistent, demanding attention. Ethan reached for his phone, thumbs trembling slightly as he dialed the urgent care clinic. I need to come in as soon as possible," he stammered when a receptionist answered, his voice betraying the anxiety he tried so desperately to hide. The woman on the other end promised him an appointment within the hour. Ethan hung up and sank back into the couch, feeling a mix of worry and dread coil tight around his chest. As he waited, his mind drifted, not for the first time recently, to Julian Carter. Julian had been distant over the past few weeks, polite and attentive in moments, but there had been gaps in his warmth, fleeting distractions in his gaze. Ethan shook his head, trying to push the thought aside. Tonight wasn't about emotional speculation, tonight was about him, his health, his body protesting in ways he could no longer ignore. By the time he dressed in a simple sweater and jeans and stepped into the cool night air, the city felt different. The rain had lightened to a mist, leaving streets slick and reflective, echoing his own inner disquiet. Each step toward the clinic seemed heavier than the last, weighed down by anticipation and a creeping sense that this night might reveal more than he anticipated. At the clinic, Dr. Harper Willis greeted him with a calm, professional demeanor that offered a small measure of comfort. Harper was a tall, composed figure with a quiet authority, the kind of presence that could ground a patient even as anxiety threatened to take over. Ethan followed him into an examination room, noting the faint scent of antiseptic mingled with something warmer, almost human. The doctor's eyes were attentive, scanning, yet there was a softness there too, a patient-centered awareness that made Ethan slightly relax, though the ache remained unyielding. "What brings you in tonight?" Dr. Willis asked, voice gentle but direct. Ethan explained the pain, the sudden onset, the intensity. Harper listened, nodding occasionally, jotting notes, and asking probing questions that made Ethan feel simultaneously vulnerable and understood. As the doctor examined him, Ethan felt a strange duality, relief at the tangible attention to his body, and fear of what might be uncovered. Tests were ordered, blood work, an ultrasound, a few other assessments Harper deemed necessary. Ethan lay on the examination table, stomach still protesting, mind wandering back to Julian again. There had been a message on Julian's phone earlier that day, a cryptic note about meeting someone after work. Ethan had brushed it off then, convincing himself it was harmless, perhaps a friend. But now, in the sterile quiet of the clinic, the thought gnawed at him. Was his body's reaction merely physical, or was his stress, his unspoken suspicions, manifesting in ways he couldn't control? Dr. Willis returned with preliminary observations, speaking cautiously. "Your vitals are stable, but there are irregularities we'll need to explore further," the doctor said. Ethan's stomach lurched, not from pain, but from the implication. The doctor's words were measured, professional, but there was an undercurrent, an unspoken acknowledgement that something unusual was happening. Ethan nodded, attempting composure, though a shiver ran through him. Leaving the clinic, Ethan felt the night press closer, streets blurred by mist and reflections of neon light. The ache in his stomach hadn't lessened, and now it carried a new weight, the heaviness of unanswered questions, both about his health and about Julian. Each step toward home was accompanied by a chorus of thoughts he couldn't silence. Had he ignored signs for too long? Had he misread the subtle shifts in their relationship, dismissing them as stress or fatigue? When Ethan finally reached his apartment, he paused at the doorway, key in hand, hesitant. The hallway was silent, dimly lit, almost intimate in its quietness. He could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the gentle click of a radiator, the comforting cadence of familiarity, but beneath it, there was tension, the intangible presence of uncertainty. He set his keys on the counter and sank onto the couch again, wrapping a thin blanket around his shoulders. His phone buzzed, a message from Julian. Ethan hesitated before opening it. "Can't wait to see you later," it read. A simple line, but tonight it felt layered, ambiguous, heavy with unspoken meaning. Ethan stared at it, stomach twisting, heart pounding, not just from physical pain, but from the uneasy anticipation of what lay ahead. He knew he had to find out, had to confront not only the ache in his body but the questions in his heart, and so he sat, the city alive outside his window, rain falling softly against glass, caught between dread and determination. Whatever awaited him, answers from Dr. Willis, truths from Julian, he knew the night was far from over. There was a story to uncover, one that would reveal more than just the cause of a stomach ache. Ethan's journey had begun, and the first step was simply to wait, to feel, and to brace for the revelations that would not stay hidden much longer. Ethan barely slept that night. The ache in his stomach had dulled slightly, but the tension in his chest remained unyielding, a persistent drumbeat of worry that refused to be silenced. Each time he closed his eyes, he pictured Julian, imagining the subtle hesitations in his partner's gaze, the way his phone seemed to demand attention that Ethan wasn't meant to see. It was irrational, he told himself. Trust, after all, was the foundation of their relationship, but the seed of suspicion had already taken root, growing quietly in the darkness. By morning, sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting the apartment in pale gold. Ethan sat at the kitchen table, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, his mind elsewhere. He had called Dr. Harper Willis to discuss follow-up results, and the doctor had scheduled another round of tests. But while the appointment would provide clarity about his health, it could not untangle the knot of unease forming around Julian. Ethan had always been introspective, sensitive to the subtleties of human behavior, and now those instincts screamed warnings he was reluctant to acknowledge. Julian arrived home later than usual, carrying a canvas bag filled with groceries, a casual smile playing on his lips. Yet, Ethan noted the tension in his shoulders, the slight avoidance of eye contact when he entered the apartment. He wondered if Julian sensed Ethan's growing wariness, or if it was simply a reflection of his own anxiety magnifying every movement, every word. The couple exchanged greetings, polite and measured, but Ethan felt a distance that had not existed before, a subtle fracture in their shared space. Ethan tried to focus on mundane tasks, unpacking groceries, arranging fruit on the counter, rinsing dishes, but his mind kept returning to the message he had glimpsed yesterday, the one that had seemed innocuous in daylight but now felt heavy with implication. The desire to understand, to uncover the truth, grew stronger with each passing hour. He remembered conversations with his best friend, Noah Sinclair, who had always been a voice of reason, and he wondered if reaching out might provide guidance or simply add fuel to the fire of his own speculation. Eventually, the temptation became too great. While Julian was in the bedroom, humming softly as he tidied a shelf, Ethan picked up his partner's phone. His hands trembled slightly, though he tried to mask it as casual curiosity. The screen lit up, displaying a string of encrypted messages he could only partially decipher, the words vague yet undeniably intimate. There were plans, references to meetings, and a tone that suggested secrecy rather than transparency. Ethan's stomach tightened, not from the physical ache that had driven him to the clinic, but from a deep, visceral sense of betrayal. Memories flashed unbidden, laughter shared on weekends, the warmth of Julian's hand in his own, quiet nights watching films in their living room. Those moments contrasted sharply with the creeping uncertainty that now invaded Ethan's perception of his relationship. Each memory, once a source of comfort, now carried the weight of doubt. He tried to rationalize, to remind himself that assumptions could be misleading, yet the evidence before him was enough to stir a storm of emotions he could neither fully control nor ignore. Throughout the day, Ethan oscillated between confronting Julian and attempting to suppress his suspicions. The ache in his stomach had transformed, merging with anxiety and worry, forming a physical echo of his inner turmoil. Dr. Willis's voice replayed in his mind, subtle hints that stress and emotional strain could manifest physically. Perhaps this was the truth, Perhaps the body's rebellion was a reflection of unspoken truths pressing against him, demanding recognition. Ethan found himself pacing the apartment, restless, unable to commit to either confrontation or denial. He called Noah Sinclair, who suggested patience, careful observation, and emotional self-care. "You need clarity, Ethan," Noah said, voice steady. "But you also need to protect yourself emotionally. Don't rush into something that could hurt you more than it already has." Ethan listened, nodding silently, appreciating the guidance yet feeling the weight of every unanswered question pressing on his chest. As evening descended, the city outside his window shifted from golden hues to deep blues, streetlights flickering like distant stars. Ethan's anxiety had not diminished, if anything, it had sharpened. He could no longer ignore the signs, the inconsistencies in Julian's behavior, the secretive tone of his messages. Each small revelation acted as a magnifying glass, focusing his attention on what he feared to confront. He realized that avoiding the truth would not provide peace, it would only prolong the torment and uncertainty. Finally, Ethan decided to speak to Julian, though the exact words remained elusive in his mind. He observed his partner from the living room, noting the casual ease in Julian's movements, the faint smile as he hummed, unaware of the storm brewing silently in Ethan's gaze. Ethan's thoughts raced, how to approach this without confrontation turning into conflict. How to seek truth without destroying what they had. The questions hung in the air, unspoken yet pressing, shaping the tension in every corner of their shared apartment. Dr. Willis's call came later that evening. Ethan answered with a mix of hope and apprehension, the phone trembling slightly in his hand. The doctor's voice was calm, measured, yet hinted at concern. "Ethan, the test results show irregularities that may be related to stress and emotional strain," Dr. Willis explained. "I recommend a thorough follow-up, but it's important to address the underlying factors that might be contributing to your physical symptoms." Ethan's heart sank. The physical ailment was intertwined with emotional turbulence, a reality he had sensed but now faced with undeniable confirmation. By the time the call ended, Ethan felt an almost unbearable weight pressing on him. He sat on the couch, staring at the soft glow of the city lights, thinking about Julian, thinking about the encrypted messages, thinking about the doctor's warning. The ache in his stomach persisted, a stubborn reminder that his body and mind were intimately connected, that avoidance was no longer an option. He realized that he needed answers, not just for his health, but for the emotional truths that had begun to surface, threatening to unravel the foundation of his relationship. As he heard Julian moving in the bedroom, humming softly, Ethan's mind made a quiet, resolute decision. Tonight, he would seek clarity, confront the reality of his suspicions, and face whatever truths lay hidden behind familiar smiles and casual gestures. The tension was unbearable, yet it was also necessary, a crucible through which he would confront both betrayal and self-understanding. The night stretched ahead, fraught with uncertainty, and Ethan knew that what he discovered in the coming hours would change everything. Ethan sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped tightly together, knuckles white. The ache in his stomach had dulled into a persistent, low thrum, but his chest remained heavy with anticipation. The apartment was quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. Julian had returned from work earlier, and now, as Ethan watched him moving about the kitchen, every small gesture seemed magnified, each shift of weight, the tilt of his head, the soft sigh as he set down a glass. Ethan's mind raced, each thought pulling him closer to the confrontation he had been dreading all day. He took a deep breath and called Julian's name, steadying his voice. "Julian, can we talk?" The words were simple, but they carried the weight of 1,000 unspoken questions. Julian paused mid-motion, the smile that had lingered on his lips faltering slightly. He turned, leaning against the counter, curiosity and unease flickering in his eyes. "Of course," he replied, voice calm, though not entirely free of tension. Ethan motioned toward the living room, and they sat across from each other, the distance between them charged with unspoken truths. He searched Julian's face, reading the subtle cues he had learned to trust over the years, the slight furrow of the brow, the hesitation before speaking, the avoidance of direct eye contact. Ethan's own pulse quickened. He had rehearsed countless scenarios in his mind, but now, faced with the reality, he realized that no amount of preparation could ease the intensity of this moment. "I know something's been going on," Ethan began, keeping his tone even, measured. "I don't want to accuse you without reason, but I've seen things, messages, behavior, that I can't ignore." He paused, swallowing the lump that had formed in his throat. "I need the truth, Julian. I can't keep wondering anymore." Julian's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment, silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Then he exhaled, a quiet sound that seemed to carry months of hidden tension. "Ethan, you're right," he admitted, voice low and tinged with regret. "I haven't been honest with you. I made a mistake. It was brief, but it happened, and I didn't know how to tell you." Ethan's chest tightened, a mixture of relief and heartache washing over him. The words confirmed the suspicions that had plagued him for weeks, yet hearing them spoken aloud made the pain undeniably real. He leaned back slightly, trying to process the revelation. "Why, Julian? Why now?" His voice was quieter, almost fragile, carrying the weight of hurt tempered by a desire to understand. Julian shifted, gaze dropping to his hands. "I felt lonely, Ethan. I thought I could handle it, that it wouldn't hurt us, but I was wrong. I let my insecurities and frustrations guide me, and I didn't consider the consequences for us, or for you." His voice cracked, an unguarded vulnerability spilling through the facade of composure. Ethan studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in Julian's tone against the betrayal of trust. He felt anger, yes, sharp and biting, but it was intertwined with lingering affection, the memories of shared laughter, quiet nights, and tender moments that had defined their relationship. The ache in his chest mirrored the ache in his stomach from earlier, both physical and emotional, a reminder that his body had been responding to truths he could no longer avoid. "I appreciate your honesty," Ethan said finally, voice steadying. "But honesty doesn't erase what happened. I need time, to think, to process, to decide what this means for us. I can't just move past it." Julian nodded, understanding the gravity of the statement. He reached out tentatively, but Ethan held up a hand, a gentle boundary. "I need space tonight," Ethan continued. "Not to push you away, but to protect myself. I need to feel whole again, to separate my love for you from the hurt you caused." Julian's shoulders slumped slightly, and he exhaled, the tension in his body easing just enough to acknowledge acceptance. "I understand," he said softly, voice full of remorse. Ethan remained on the couch, alone for a few minutes, letting the quiet envelop him. The city outside shifted to deeper tones of night, lights flickering like distant constellations. He reflected on the events of the past weeks, the subtle signs he had ignored, the anxiety that had manifested physically, the creeping suspicion that had become impossible to deny. He realized that this confrontation, though painful, had been necessary. The truth, however difficult, was a prerequisite for healing, and for reclaiming control over his own life and emotions. Later, Julian returned to the living room, sitting at a respectful distance. They spoke cautiously, choosing words with care. There was no shouting, no blaming, only acknowledgement of mistakes and tentative steps toward understanding. Julian expressed regret repeatedly, his sincerity evident in the quiet tone and measured gestures. Ethan listened, allowing himself to absorb the remorse while maintaining his own sense of self. As the night wore on, Ethan felt the ache in his stomach finally begin to subside, replaced by a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in weeks. The physical discomfort had mirrored the emotional turmoil, and now, with truths laid bare, the tension within him eased incrementally. He realized that forgiveness, if it came at all, would not be immediate. Trust, once fractured, required time and careful reconstruction. Ethan finally rose from the couch, moving toward the window to gaze at the city below. The neon lights shimmered on wet streets, reflections dancing in puddles like fragments of memory and hope. Julian remained behind, silent, watching him, both aware that the night had marked a turning point in their relationship. They were no longer enveloped in uncertainty, yet the path ahead was undefined, a delicate balance between reconciliation and self-preservation. Ethan's phone buzzed with a message from Dr. Willis, follow-up appointment confirmed, tests ready for review. A reminder that physical health, like emotional health, required attention, vigilance, and care. Ethan smiled faintly, a mixture of relief and determination washing over him. Whatever lay ahead, whether reconciliation with Julian or a journey apart, he would face it with awareness, strength, and a renewed understanding of his own boundaries. As he sat by the window, breathing in the cool night air, Ethan acknowledged a simple truth: endings and beginnings often intertwined, and clarity, even when painful, was preferable to lingering doubt. The night had delivered harsh truths, but it had also offered the possibility of growth, healing, and self-discovery. With that knowledge, he allowed himself a small measure of peace, knowing that tomorrow, the story of his life, and his heart, would continue to unfold, one deliberate step at a time.